Good morning and welcome back to Talk About It Tuesday with the Cuny Athletic Conference, sponsored by Hospital for Special Surgery. My name is Ryan Martin. I am the Inclusive Sports Coordinator for the City University of New York. Throughout this series, we've been trying to provide you content that allows you to best manage, the time and space where we're at. Today is no exception. Today, we are going to focus on getting the most financially out of your individual campuses. So I have the pleasure of having Zalika Daniels with me. Zalika is the University Deputy Director of Financial Aid Compliance at Cuny's central office, and a great resource for a lot of the financial questions our student athletes are going to have now and going forward. So Zalika, thank you for joining us.
Okay, great. Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to be talking about financial aid and basically the impacts of COVID-19. I figured by now most of you would have already known what the financial aid process is for filing and have that kind of understanding. And so I thought in order to gear this more towards what's happening today, we would focus a little bit more on COVID-19's impact to financial aid, what's changed, what is happening for the fall, what happened in the spring, and how it actually relates to your eligibility for the fall term. So we're going to be talking about and covering the FAFSA, the federal Pell Grant, the federal work study grant. We're going to talk about the spring 2020 no credit grade policy. We're going to cover financial aid, the impact of what happened in the spring with that grade policy to federal SAP, which is Satisfactory Academic Progress. We're going to cover special circumstances, student loans, private scholarships, New York State aid, their dependency statuses, and their response to COVID-19, and provide a few resources as well. What we'll ask is that questions are held to the end. You can probably put them in the chat and I can review them towards the end because there's a lot of dense information to get through. So everyone knows the FAFSA, most likely. It's otherwise known as the free application for federal student aid. And students are advised to complete the FAFSA as their preliminary step, the very first step in looking for any kind of resources to getting financial aid to cover school. By completing the Pell Grant, you're considered for, by completing the FAFSA, you're considered for such financial aid programs such as the Pell Grant, student loans, and work study. And the website to do that is fafsa.ed.gov. The Pell Grant is the most popular of all the programs, and this requires that students have a certain level of eligibility and a certain EFC, or expected family contribution, that's calculated from the income and assets that are listed from both the student and, if they're dependent, their parents, to calculate that. The Pell Grant is, like I said, the biggest award, and Cuny is one of the largest paying Pell institutions in the country, if not the largest, behind, I believe, the University of California system. So the United States Department of Ed offers the Pell Grant. They offer the Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, otherwise known as SEOG. There's the Federal Work Study Grant. There's also Teach Grants for students who are thinking of going into teacher programs and becoming teachers after graduation. The following requirements for Pell, generally, and for all of these Title IV, otherwise known as Title IV aid programs, is that a student be in a degree-seeking program, actually obtaining a bachelor's or an associate's degree or a master's degree, grad degree. You have to be registered for Pell, especially at least 6 credits for most programs. With Pell, you can possibly get it for as low as 1 credit. You have to stay in good academic standing and making satisfactory academic progress towards completion of that degree, which means that you're actually earning the credits that you attempt to take and that you are passing your courses with a good GPA. You have to be a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen, so permanent residents are eligible. You can't be in default of any previous federal student loan or refund of any financial aid previously received to the federal government. We can sometimes ask for a student to provide documentation. Sometimes that's mandated, that a student is open for a review called verification. And in that, certain documents are asked for from the students and parents to confirm the information that's listed on the FAFSA. So that is a requirement. If asked for it, it must be turned in. If you're male, you have to register for selective service between the ages of 18 to 25, and you can't have been convicted for possession or selling of illegal drugs while getting any financial aid. So the Pell Grant for this coming year, for 2021, every year the federal government decides what the new Pell Limit will be. And for this current academic year, it's gone up to $6,345. And you know our tuition is slightly below that. So Pell Grants are awarded to students who are in their undergraduate programs. You couldn't have completed a bachelor's degree or another graduate degree from anywhere else, even internationally. And so students are limited to 12 terms for the lifetime of Pell. So you have a maximum limit of how many terms you could receive Pell for. And it can provide students with funding for whether you're 12 credits or above, which is 12 to 18 credits is full time. If you're 3/4 time, 9 credits. If you're half time, 6 credits. If you're less than half time, there's also a sliding scale in which Pell is awarded to students. And it's actually available in the summer as well if you attend pretty much on a half time basis. So now I'll touch into work study because I'm skipping SEOG and teach because they're really not as relevant, I think, for the purposes of what we're discussing. If you're packaged with SEOG, you'll receive it on your financial aid notification from your college. And the Teach Grant is particularly for students who are majoring in teaching ed programs. And at Cuny, we only offer it for our seniors who are in undergrad, and then it goes on for graduate students. So for the purposes of this, I've decided to exclude that and go into the federal Pell Grant. So this is another very large popular program at Cuny. It gives students the opportunity to be placed in a part-time job that lets them work around their academic schedule. And if you're offered work study, it's most important that you can find a job anywhere, on campus, off campus, to get the funds. And the financial aid office is the placement office that helps students secure these positions. So to receive federal work study, you have to be in good academic standing. So again, that's making SAP, which means passing credits attempted and having a decent GPA of at least a 2.0. You have to have been registered for at least 6 credits at Cuny. And you also have to find an eligible part-time job. There are part-time jobs, obviously, that are both on campus, off campus in general. And there's also jobs that are non-work study in nature and that are work study in nature. It has to be a federal work study designated position. Students who are applying for these jobs have to complete a number of not income forms, but employment opportunity forms. So a W-2, an I-9, which is also very necessary to prove that you can work in the United States, withholding forms. So all of that has to be completed as part of the onboarding process. And if you're offered a work study position, we ask you to accept it. Number one, because work study is one of the most popular programs. It sells out very quickly, and we don't nearly have as much funds to cover all the students that get offered. So if you are thinking of working and you're going to school, here's a way for you to actually work around your school schedule in a job that may give you pertinent skills to what you're actually studying in school. And so you may or may not earn the entire amount that you're offered. You may get an award for $4,000 for the year, but you might earn less than that. It really depends on what your scheduled hours will be. And the rate of pay is basic. It is what is the New York State wage of $15 an hour for work study. So it's, the same rate of pay that you would get working anywhere else. And what you should know about work study for fall 2020 is that in wake of COVID and with the campuses not really as operational as they were, working in this hybrid condition, we're not really allowing for work study students to work on campus. So with the fact that work study students cannot work on campus physically, they have allowed for students who have, or positions that have remote in nature capabilities that you can work from home using your Chromebook or your laptop or your cell phone. You know, it's not required again, but these positions are remote now in nature for the fall in wake of COVID-19. So students can still continue to work, study. The jobs maybe not be as vast for the ones that are locally on campus, but because of that, we actually have a cache of off-campus jobs that will also pay under the work-study program. And Cuny has recently enrolled in something called the Federal Work-Study Experimental Program. The federal government rolled out this experimental program to closely tie students to their majors and what they're studying in school to work-study positions, to give students the ability to earn dollars using their work-study awards, receive beneficial workplace training for their actual fields, and see what the outcomes will be. So with this experimental program, and CUNY is participating, one of the program aspects is that we will allow, for the first time, students who are taking coursework that is required for clinicals or student teaching, they can actually take that work that they're doing, those internships that they're doing, which you registered for, and actually get paid work-study funding. So if that's something that is in your major and you're doing and you're enrolled in required clinical coursework or student teaching, we ask that you could visit your financial aid office, well, not visit the office, but virtually visit the office, or contact the Federal Work-Study Coordinator with any questions. We have a whole process lined up to align those students to actually get paid for those relevant required coursework. So now I'm going to talk about the spring 2020 no credit grading policy and what that impact was on financial aid. So with COVID-19, the university came up with a new grading policy just for the spring to allow for students who were not possibly doing well or who were impacted by COVID or the changes or disruption to learning during the spring to then decide that they can have the option to choose on a grade by grade basis what course they felt they weren't necessarily doing well in and convert that to a credit or no credit policy, which is like almost like a pass fail, except in a pass fail, you actually have a fail. In a credit, no credit, you actually don't have an F on your transcript. It doesn't measure into your GPA, so it's not reducing your GPA. And this was especially done because of COVID-19. So students were allowed to see their courses, see their grades. Obviously, if you got an A, you wouldn't opt into taking the A into a pass or into a credit, you would keep the A. But for students who knew they were getting a D or getting an F, they could have decided then they wanted to opt into a no credit, and that would show. So we ask that students obviously get training necessary, speaking to their academic advisors and getting as much information on what this decision would be like. And students were given 20 days after the final grade submission deadline in order to make that change. So a credit would obviously, credit grade would convert into actual credit, whereas the failing grade, as I said before, would convert to the no credit grade with no credit being awarded. And in this policy, it actually does not impact your GPA. So an F would bring down your weighted average, whereas a no credit would not. It has no bearing at all. And so students with these grades within CUNY, per the policy, were allowed to actually transfer. So it wasn't going to get in the way of you moving from school to school if you were going from an associate's to a bachelor's or changing college within any of the CUNY system. And so what's important to know about this is that it actually was allowed for courses that were in your major, prerequisite courses to get into your major, honor courses, the amount of maximum credits that a student was allowed to get in credit, no credit was waived for this reason. But what we will say is that if a student has a major or a prerequisite course that's required, it's important that if you think that you did not do well in the course, to either repeat the course, take it over, speak with the professor before deciding whether or not you're ready for that actual course if it were a prerequisite, mainly because you want to make sure that you're academically prepared for that course. So if you felt that you got a no credit grade and didn't really do well in that prereq, it's important that you get that basis of information before you move into the requisite course. So there was a grade glossary change that occurred based off of this, and it was attached to each transcript to update to show that in the spring 2020, credit and no credit grades were an option to students. And this policy is actually Board of Trustees approved by Cuny, and it's effective from April 1st, 2020. It doesn't apply to any of the grad schools though. They have their own version of pass-fail. And what's important about this is that normally when a student is getting federal student aid, they're measured for something called federal SAP, or Satisfactory Academic Progress. And within that, that means you have to pass a certain amount of credits within a certain period of time, and passing with a passing GPA of at least a 2.0 across the board, a cumulative GPA of a 2.0. And so when a student fails to meet those requirements, they then are in danger of losing their financial aid. And there's a whole process in terms of a student writing for an appeal to be considered in order to keep their aid with documentation. For students who opted into the credit no credit grade policy, we had designed that, again, the no credit grade equals what would have been an F, but really does not equal an F, is not lowering your GPA. And so we've excluded any credits that a student would have attempted that they did not complete. So any NC grades would be excluded from our federal calculation of SAP as a response to COVID-19. So normally a student would have had to do an appeal process, like I explained previously. With students who opted into the credit no credit grade policy due to COVID, there is no need for an appeal. We programmed it to be done automatically. So this would mean that if a student had no credit for the spring, if they took, let's say, 4 classes, got 2 A's and would have gotten 2 F's, took the 2 F's and converted it to a no credit grade, the student on a normal term, if they had 4 straight A's, they'd have a 4.0, 4 classes. But with 2 A's and 2 F's, they probably would have had barely a 2.0 or even less than that. And the weighted average of it would have been lower. As a result of this process and this grading policy, those F's are now NCs. They don't weigh down the GPA, and we won't stop you from getting aid for the following term, which is now the fall 2020 term. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about special circumstances, because I know that so many of us were impacted from being, displaced during COVID. And for some of us, it's just working remotely or learning remotely. For others, it's been a lot more. In result of students who've experienced this kind of loss, there is a process that we could do called special circumstances or an income adjustment in the financial aid office to review to see if you're eligible for more federal aid. Cases like this happen when a student or the parent has lost their job, if God forbid they've passed away, if there's a divorce, or a loss of income, a significant loss of income. And so we have this process called a special circumstance where we take the information from the FAFSA that was completed. Remember, for the year of 2020, the FAFSA income that's listed is your IRS income from 2 years prior. So it's from 2018's tax return, which was a different time and a different world. And so in that time, if a student has experienced recent loss in the last few months due to COVID, like I said, for unemployment, death of a wage earner, death of a parent, divorce, we can exclude that income that would have shown on that 2018 tax return that would have given the student the EFC. And by reducing that, the student may be more eligible for more federal aid programs. So normally the big pull with doing a professional judgment or a special circumstance is that if a student were not Pell eligible, not receiving that Pell Grant that I mentioned in the very first slides, that goes up to the $6,000 or so amount. If the student has now, God forbid, parent lost the job, that loss of income is now recalculated by the financial aid office to see if it will get a student additional Pell eligibility. So the review of a special circumstance, it's very invasive. Students often don't realize how invasive it can be. The financial aid office will require a lot of documentation. They usually have a form to complete, and they will ask for a death certificate, tax returns, unemployment statement, proof of income, proof of assets. They have to restructure your income, and they have to do it in a way that is compliant with federal government rules for the US DOE. So it is a very invasive process, but it is something that we do allow. And we understand, obviously, with all the changes that have happened recently, that this is something that students need to very well be aware about, be aware of. So if this is your circumstance, we invite you to contact your financial aid website, your financial aid office, check their website for what they have as a special circumstance form or an income adjustment form. Call them and speak with a counselor in order to explain your process, and they can guide you on what documentation is required and what the next steps are. And any documents that you need to upload, we've actually created the student document upload tool, which is built into Cuny First to allow students to submit their documents remotely since the offices are not physically open. So now we're going to talk on student loans a little bit, not in terms of borrowing, but more so just for you to know what has happened because of COVID. So federally, the U.S. Department of Ed has paused interest on federally held student loans like direct loans, like the subsidized direct loan, the unsubsidized direct loan, which accrues interest while you're in school. Perkins loans doesn't exist anymore, so forgive my typo, I'll remove that. And they also are doing this automatically and retroactively to March 13th, 2020, when the pandemic was declared a national emergency. For more information, students are advised to visit myfedloan.org. And if you're experiencing financial hardship, you can contact the loan servicer for more information on deferments and forbearances that are allowed. They also recently actually just automatically put all students into an automatic forbearance and deferment until the end of this year. So this is also an option for students that will be done automatically. Now, if you're in school and you're enrolled at least 6 credits, this really would not necessarily affect you because you're not paying for your loans as you're enrolled in school. However, if you have an unsubsidized direct loan, interest is accruing while you're enrolled in school, and that interest will now be deferred. And so if your parent has also borrowed a parent loan, this is also something where they can suspend their payments until the end of the pandemic, or until the end of at least the academic year, unless there's another pushback on the expiration date. So this is something because when a parent borrows a parent loan, they actually start repaying the loan within the period of time that the student is enrolled in school. Within 60 days of the student parent borrowing the loan, they go into repayment. And so if a student has private loans, we encourage you to obviously contact your servicer for private loans. While this does not apply to private lenders, I'm sure that there are some things that you can speak with them about in terms of making sure you avoid going into default, or see if there's anything that they're doing on an individual case-by-case basis to suspend any interest or payments. So I just want to go back and pivot to the private scholarships. While private scholarships are obviously not administered through CUNY, the credit and no credit grade policy may have an impact on private scholarships. So for that, we would ask that any student who has a private scholarship not CUNY held should probably advise or speak with their private scholarship organization to understand how this grade change, this no impact grade, will actually impact them. Because some private scholarships require that a student make a certain GPA or pass a certain amount of credits each semester. And so you want to get that information directly from the source of the private scholarship to know whether or not this no credit grade or credit grade policy will stand, because your GPA may not be calculated. So I mentioned earlier about the Cuny document upload tool, and it's Cuny based. It's a secure method because again, the offices are closed. There's no one to drop it off to for the most part at the Cuny campuses. And so with the amount of documentation that we sometimes ask for in order to clear a student, to get them packaged, to give them their aid for the term, the university has created the document upload tool built into Cuny First, where once you log into Cuny First, you follow the menu tree of campus solutions, self-service, document upload, and then it goes in with your name and your EMPL ID. And you can select a drop down for what type of document you plan to submit. At this time, they're taking financial aid documents, immunization, health services documents, and registrar documents. And so you'd have to categorize what document it is in order to submit it. And so I give a little bit of steps in terms of going to the drop down, picking the option, hitting the go, and then you could actually pick what type of document in financial aid is it that you're submitting, so they can route it. So if it's for New York State Aid and TAP, you click TAP. If it's for Pell, you click Pell. If it's for loans, you click loans. And so then you'll get a message that says you're transferring the information into the repository system. Now, if you get an error message during the file upload, you can contact your campus help desk, or you can wait a little bit and try to go back in and see if you can upload it again. But this is a significant step to allow for students to turn in their documents. So we're going to launch into New York State Aid, which is another slew of financial aid programs that are available to students who are considered New York State residents going to New York State schools, which Cuny is. And so just a disclaimer that the state of New York has had drastically reduced state revenues in response to COVID. And while they are pending federal assistance, which is they've been waiting on since April, certain awards may be reduced or prioritized for awarding under their programs. So the Excelsior Scholarship is one of them. This scholarship affords students the opportunity to get most of their tuition covered up to a certain rate, minus any other aid the student might have received. And so Excelsior funding is contingent on what's happening with you know, the federal assistance that may come for new students mainly. So for any student who's a continuing Excelsior student who had Excelsior in the past, you will probably receive your Excelsior automatically for the fall once you met the program conditions. However, for new applicants like new freshmen or new applicants, meaning you're a brand new applicant but you're a continuing student and never had Excelsior before, that is actually being held up now. It's pending to see if that financial assistance will come through. So New York State's Higher Education Services Corp HESC administers all of these state programs such as the TAP Grant, the Excelsior Scholarship, and a host of state scholarships like STEM, Scholarship for Academic Excellence, the World Trade Center Scholarship, Deceased Firefighters and State Worker Scholarship. There's so many awards that the state of New York gives, and we're very fortunate to have a state that's so rich in terms of providing these awards for students. So the tuition assistance program TAP helps to pay for tuition, and it goes up to an annual amount of $51.65 per academic year. And they also have a part-time award that if you're part-time, there's also a portion of it that you can receive on a part-time basis. And TAP is a grant. These are grant programs, which means they're not loans and you don't have to pay them back. To be eligible for TAP, you have to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, and the website lists what eligible non-citizen is defined as. You have to be a legal resident of New York State or be charged actually in-state tuition, which is what we do automatically for legal residents of New York State. For TAP particularly, you have to be 12 credits, and the 12 credits that you're taking actually have to apply to your degree program, so it has to be required coursework, major coursework, gen ed coursework, not necessarily minors, but it has to actually apply to your degree program. And so 12 credits or more, you'll get that amount. And for part-time TAP, it can go for students who are 6 to 11 credits. Again, the coursework must also be required. And this also goes for students who are in their first-time degree. The state will only pay funding towards one degree. So if you already previously earned a bachelor's degree, you're not eligible for TAP. Okay, so you have to have graduated from a high school in the United States or passed the GED exam or passed the ATB test in order to qualify. So for students who don't have a U.S. high school diploma, they need to either have a GED or pass the ATB exam that is administered locally at the colleges. And right now it's working from a remote nature in order to qualify for New York State Aid. You have to be matriculated. So again, enrolled in an approved degree program. You have to be in good academic standing, right? Passing your credits. Again, they have their own version of what we call SAP. It's called Progress in Pursuit, where you have to pass your credits attempted, pass with a certain GPA, but with the state, you have to do it by a certain term. So for every term, you have to have a certain amount of credits earned. You have to have a general GPA of at least a C average, and you have to have been charged at least $200 of tuition. For TAP eligibility, you also can't have been in default of federal or student loans and meet income eligibility requirements. So for New York State aid, residency for New York State aid and getting these awards, you have to have been considered a New York State student living in New York, either a citizen, qualified paroled refugee, permanent resident alien, and you had to have lived in New York for the last 12 months prior to the term. And so for applicants who qualify for any New York State awards under the New York State DREAM Act, they must have met any of the eligible citizenship and immigration classifications that are listed on their website, as well as the high school or tuition charge requirements. For New York State dependency statuses, the regulations for independent students are a little bit different. And, you know, I didn't touch on what it is for federal aid because it's pretty automatic. With federal aid, they will ask questions to determine whether or not you are considered a student who is dependent. It's, you know, usually 24 or older, married, veteran in the armed forces, children that you support on your own for at least 50% of support, or in graduate school. Those are generally the requirements for federal student aid to be independent. The state is a lot more stringent. And the reason why I pull out this page is because it doesn't match what the federal government allows for Title IV aid. So New York State aid dependency status is, you're really considered a dependent student up until the age of 35. So it's a little bit different. And I wanted to touch on that because I know a lot of students get thrown by the fact that it's not the same as the federal government. So for the aid year 2021, students must meet all of the federal conditions. Okay, that's very nice. Okay, sorry, that's my 4-year-old. I apologize. So students couldn't have lived in a home that was owned or resided on by their parents, even if they paid rent to the parents. They can't be listed as a dependent on their parents' tax return. They couldn't have gotten any money of more than $750 in financial assistance from either of their parents either. If they answered yes to any of the questions that are listed on the TAP application and they're under the age of 35, then they must put their parental information in on their TAP application. And so if a student is under 22 by June 30th of 2020, there's certain conditions that you have to meet in order to be considered independent for state aid purposes. Your parents are deceased, totally or permanently disabled, declared incompetent by judicial action. You're a ward of the court, which is not obviously counting for incarcerated students. You have to have had public assistance under your own name, so have your own budget letter. And this doesn't include food stamps or unemployment. And you should have been rendered financially independent due to involuntary dissolution of your family. So the relinquishing of your parental rights if your parents' rights were relinquished. So the state puts students through a little bit more stringent of a level and process in order to be considered independent for aid. The last caveat to being independent for state aid is that you're a veteran and honorably discharged from any of the armed services. So automatically, if you meet any of those conditions, you'll be considered independent, and the state will ask you to do supplemental forms and possibly provide supporting documents to confirm that. And so to do so, you would visit hes.ny.gov for additional information. So the TAP award limits go from 500 to 5165 per academic year for dependent undergrad students. For married independent undergrad students with dependents of their own, it can go from 500 to 5165. But for married independent undergrad students who don't have dependents of their own, the range goes to $3,025 per academic year. And for independent undergrad students, it goes to the same. So to apply for TAP, you have to do a FAFSA application. After you do the FAFSA, then you also do the TAP application. When we mention PIN here, you have your FAFSA student ID, but the TAP application also gives you another TAP application and a TAP ID. So you have to complete and provide all of this information to the FAFSA. And then because you're a New York State resident, we're actually fortunate enough to have a hyperlink in the FAFSA application that will link you to the New York State aid application through HESC for you to complete it. If you do a paper FAFSA, which I don't know how you would find a paper FAFSA, but if you do one, it is possible for you to still do a TAP application, but you'd have to follow up with doing the TAP application secondarily, because the FAFSA must be completed first. And so the application deadline for TAP and for New York State aid generally is June 30th. For the aid year in which it is sought. The Excelsior Scholarship, however, is very different. For new students who are first-time applicants for Excelsior, or even a continuing student who's a first-time applicant to the Excelsior Scholarship, the closure date is August 31st, which was Sunday. However, the date is subject to change. When I was completing this last night, I was able to actually go on and still do the Excelsior application. So if you haven't done it, I don't know if it's down today, but if you haven't done it, go in and do it if you can. So for Excelsior, which is very different, it still meets all the same conditions, except your adjusted gross income cannot be more than $125,000 for a student who's dependent on their parents. So that's the big caveat for Excelsior. And with Excelsior, whereas with TAP, it's 12 credits or more, with Excelsior, you must take at least 12 credits, but you must earn 30 credits for the entire academic year. So if you took 12 in the fall and 12 in the spring, you can make up the remaining credits in the summertime to earn 30 credits. You have 365 days within the academic year to earn the 30 credits for the first period in which you've enrolled. So it's most important that a student earn 30 credits each year in order to keep the award. So at the end of your freshman year, you have to have 30, at the end of your sophomore year, 60, at the end of your junior year, 90, and then at the end of your senior year, you're done at 120. So it's most important with the Excelsior that not only do you do the application if you're a first-time applicant, you also have to sign a contract. And that contract requires that you live in New York State for the length of time, or you work in New York State for the length of time that you received the scholarship. So if you got the scholarship for one semester, you work in New York for the length of that period of time, 6 months, 3 months, however long a semester is, in order to have equated to the amount of Excelsior received. If, let's say, you got the Excelsior in your freshman year, and then in your sophomore year you lost it, you've already fulfilled the service requirement by contract of having the year of receiving Excelsior and living in New York, even though you were going to school, living in New York in your sophomore year and not receiving Excelsior, you would have fulfilled the service requirement that's required by the contract. With Excelsior, it also gives students who are not on track the ability to actually catch up on credits. So they can earn credits successfully, additional credits to apply to make sure they earn the 30 credits. So for students who might have had credits that they took when they were not in college yet, pre-matriculated college credits, like in the College Now coursework, we can add that in to make you reach the eligibility. For students who transferred into Cuny, and you may have transferred in with 27 credits, but not all 27 credits applied at the time. If you, let's say, earned 30 credits, but only 27 of those credits transferred in, we will accept, or HESC will accept, the 30 credits that you earned at your prior institution to make you eligible for the first term of Excelsior, even though CUNY would have only taken 27 for the program. So there's also extra ways. If you take winter coursework, you can do that to add up on your credits, or summer as well to catch up on your credits. And the award amount for Excelsior, it can go up to $5,500, even though our tuition is at the time, it was based on the tuition of 16-17, which was $6,300. Between TAP and all the other awards a student might receive, there's also an Excelsior tuition credit and gap filling award that a student can have to help fill the gap towards that difference. And there are appeals that can be done for a student. So for a student who is looking to get Excelsior and whose adjusted gross income is $125 or less due to a change in circumstance, like what's happened with COVID-19, they can do an income appeal form through the HESC website. And for students who are determined to be ineligible because they didn't meet the credit requirements or the continued enrollment requirement, which means you have to go every single semester, fall and spring. There's also a separate appeal process that they can do, and both are located directly on the HASC website. So for New York State and COVID-19, they've determined that students who are impacted by COVID should not suffer any negative consequences to receiving their aid for future terms or even for the current term. So when COVID happened and we went remote in the spring 2020 term, it was in the middle of March. And so students were moved quickly onto remote learning platforms. And some may have adjusted well, and others might have, just been trying to catch their bearings, or you might have had a personal circumstance where, you lost a parent, like I said, or were unemployed. All of these things were impacts to COVID. And as a result, the state is willing to review those to determine whether or not they can allow the student to keep the aid for the term and also get your aid for the spring, for the following term, which is the fall. So if you met any of those eligibility requirements, where they say that you are not passing all your credits attempted, someone in your family was sick, your campus closed, you couldn't do your coursework, you didn't have a computer, any of those circumstances are all considered circumstances that may qualify you to keep your state aid for the term and also keep it for the fall, even though you might not have made the credits. Even opting into the credit, no credit grade policy was one of them. But for students who had those circumstances, they must reach out to their college's TAP certifying office to provide documentation supporting the circumstance, and there's a required form in order to consider you for this impact. And for students who are considered impacted by COVID-19, they must be manually certified by the institution. So the college TAP certifying office will certify you as impacted per COVID-19 per the document and the form submitted. And as a result, they will send that flag up to the state of New York for them to consider you moving forward in your future term for eligibility. So if you need help, if you have questions, the financial aid offices are operating remotely at this time, and many have remote counseling available. So you could contact their offices. Their websites will have all the information on how to reach out to them. If you need to upload documents, you can check on your student to-do list to see what documents are required in order to process your aid, and they should be submitted via the document upload tool. And then I also listed a number of references: the FAFSA.gov website, the HESC.ny.gov website for New York State Aid, the Federal Student Loan Servicing website. I've also provided the link to Cuny's 2021 Financial Aid Award Guide to give you a synopsis of all the types of award and the requirements that we have. And there's also a link to the Cuny Continuity Plan that we keep updated with any changes due to COVID-19 with regards to all aspects of enrollment at the university. So it has the credit, no credit grade policy. It has all the information that I mentioned from HESC. It has the document upload tool information, and it has whatever new releases we give on financial aid as well. And so I'm going to now open it up to questions.
Hi, Zalika. I'm just gonna, I'll fire the questions from folks in the chat, and then we had some pre-questions as well. So the first question I get that we have for you today says, I am a freshman at Baruch. I was not eligible for financial aid, but due to a loss of income from my parents and other circumstances during COVID, I applied for income adjustment and provided all the requested documents. My financial aid has said pending on my Cuny first for 1 month. Does it usually take this long for a request like this to be completed?
It can take this long, and here's the reason. One, all the campuses are remote. So as you heard in the middle of my presentation, I'm working from home. And so there comes a lot of challenges with that. And so the financial aid offices are all working from home. And so they are dealing with phone calls, emails, and they're inundated with income requests and just processing the aid as normal, plus these. The other thing with an income adjustment is not only when you do the form and you turn in all the required documentation, they have to restructure your aid and they have to resubmit it to the federal government. They make the changes on your FAFSA, they send those changes out to the federal government, and then your new FAFSA comes in with a new EFC to let them know if you're Pell eligible. Sometimes they also have to meet by a committee. It may not be on their process that only one person is doing the review. It could be a committee. And so it might take some time. It is a lengthy process. And I hate to say that a month pending, it seems like a very long time. And I know now where we are in school, it is because school has started. However, know that they're probably working as diligently as possible to get it worked out. I would probably say give it another 2 more weeks and then reach out to them. But in the meantime, you should decide how you might want to make payment arrangement or payment plan and ask if there's any extensions that could be done in terms of covering your balance in the meantime.
Okay, great. Thank you, Zalika. Next question. So this one came in through the chat. Can state students participate in work study as well? In the virtual work study that you referenced earlier in your presentation?
Yes, students can. The work study offices have their databases. If there's a next gen school, they advertise their jobs on their database bank online. And so students can see what jobs are available for remote work study. The only positions that are posted, I believe, are actually what are remote in nature at this time. So yes.
Okay, perfect. So you talked a little bit about the Excelsior Scholarship, and I know some of our student athletes for the inclusive and adaptive had a lot of questions on that as far as like historically non-COVID times. How long does it take to get a response, whether you've received an award from the Excelsior Scholarship or not?
In the past, before COVID, it was pretty quick. You would, if you were a first-time applicant for Excelsior, you do your FAFSA application, your TAP application, the Excelsior application, and then after the state has done income verification for you, they basically send your information to the institution. The institution then has to supply a credit breakdown for you to HES to know if you are on track. So if you're a first-time applicant who's a continuing student, we have to have shown that you were making credits per their chart. If you're a first-time applicant, we basically flip that file over very quickly and say that you're a first-time freshman with no credits earned, if that's the case. Then the state requires for you to go back onto their website and complete the contract. Oftentimes, the reason why students don't end up with Excelsior is because they forget to do the contract. So it's very important that they do that, they sign it, which is requires the working and living in New York State for the length of time. After that's done, the student is placed on a file, the student receives notification and can see if they're Excelsior approved. You won't get approved until the contract is done by the student. When you're put on the file, we receive files on a weekly basis and we load those files to Cuny first and package the students accordingly. However, you could be Excelsior eligible per the state, but you still have to meet program requirements in terms of your degree and in terms of the classes that you're taking. So that's where your local college pulls in, where FACS and Degree Works is going to be looked at to see if the courses that you're taking actually count towards your degree. So if you are a bio major and you have to take all coursework that is required for your bachelor's and your biology degree, and you're taking courses that are not counting towards your degree requirements, like intro to knitting, and it isn't applicable in your college program, then and you're not meeting the 12 credit requirement, you can't get Excelsior. So sometimes it's also going back over your major, looking at your coursework, making sure your courses are tappable or New York State aid eligible to make sure that it qualifies. And then what will happen is if it's the first term of receiving the Excelsior award, let's say it's the fall term and it's your very first term, everything is settled, the award comes in, your courses count, you get the program, you get the award on your account. We certify at the end of the term. When we certify at the end of the term, we're certifying it to say that you met the eligibility requirements, and we're also seeing whether or not you're eligible to get it for the second term, which would be the spring. If the courses that you took in the fall were all counted to your class, you'd be certified to get the fall. But if you fail to pass those courses in a pre-non-COVID environment at the time, let's say it was last fall, so you took 12 and you only passed 6, you probably would not get the second payment. So if you were to get the second payment, you wouldn't get it until the end of the spring term, because now instead of needing just the remainder of what would have been, 15 credits or so, let's say, you will need to make up the 6 credits that you didn't pass in the fall. And so sometimes you won't get that spring payment until the end of the summer, because we give you the summertime to make up those credits to make the 30 credits for the academic year.
Okay, great. Here's another question from one of the folks or one of our students that's on the chat right now. It says, is someone available to help over the phone? I'm a parent who has never done this process and feel totally lost in the process. I need more hands-on help that is not provided just by different websites.
So the federal government actually, if you're first time doing your FAFSA for the very first time, you can actually call the 1-800-FAFSA website. They have operators that will walk you through all of your questions with completing the FAFSA. So I suggest that you do that. If you're completing your TAP application and you have questions on TAP, the state website also lists the phone number where you can schedule a call back. And the state is actually calling and reaching out to parents and families to answer and facilitate any questions or issues that you have. And then locally at the Cuny colleges, if there's more detail that you need in terms of you want to take a student loan out, or you have questions on your eligibility, you can try to reach the financial aid office. Some are doing scheduled callbacks, others are responding via email, but they do have remote counseling available. So there's multiple sources. I will say that even if you need that hand holding to just walk you through the process, the websites will at least give you the phone numbers and tell you the process so you can loosely be familiar. And as you're completing the application with the questions that you have, then you'll be a little bit more adept at knowing exactly what to ask because you would have already started the process. It's not difficult. I know it's daunting sometimes to do these applications, but they also have made the FAFSA very easy. You can do an Irs Data Retrieval where you pull your information automatically from the IRS to what was filed with your tax returns to populate and answer all of the income questions on the FAFSA. And at the end of the application, because we're New York State, we have that hyperlink which pushes you right to the state aid application, so you could do your state aid application. And so, we've tried, and I think to make it a little bit more seamless, it can be daunting, but there's lots of tools out there, and there are phone numbers where you can call and get a live rep.
Great, thank you. That's good advice. So I just got a couple of questions about TAP real quick. So how is your TAP award impacted if you fail a class, and then if you lose it by not maintaining the academic standards? Are you able to regroup and get it at a later point if you start school again? Let's say it just didn't work out the first time, for whatever reason.
So I'll answer that in two thoughts of two frameworks.
Yeah, I kind of gave you a hybrid question. My apologies.
Yeah. So no, it's okay. I'm gonna do pre-COVID and post-COVID.
Awesome.
So in pre-COVID, if a student were taking credits for TAP, you have to maintain 12 credits each semester. The credits must count to your degree, and you have to make a certain GPA according to a progress chart. On the state website, they actually have a progress chart according to what degree program you're in. So they have an associate's degree chart, a bachelor's degree chart, and for students who are in a 5-year degree program, they have a 5-year degree chart. They also have an ADA chart for students who have a declared disability. So if you're ADA declared, there's also an ADA chart where each term that the student receives a TAP award has a certain amount of credits the student must earn in order to keep that award for the term. So in the first semester, I'm just throwing it out. This is just an example. I don't remember it off the top of my head. But in the first semester, you have to have earned 6 credits, okay? And you had to have a GPA of 1.7, let's say, in a bachelor's degree, okay? So you took 12 credits. The 12 credits were required for your degree, but you only passed 6. And you had a 1.7, you got your TAP, and you got to keep your TAP for that term. And that would make you eligible for TAP for term 2, which would be the second term, which would be spring. Okay. In the spring, you also have to earn, let's say, another 6 credits with a GPA of 1.7, okay? That happens again. Everything's good to go. You still have to take 12 credits. Whether or not you passed it or not, you had to have at least pass 6 according to what that chart standard was. However, by the third term, right, in order to get the payment for the third term, you had to have all credits, 12 credits passed with a 2.0 overall cumulative GPA. So they give you a step-by-step map on what's required in terms of your GPA and in terms of how many credits you have to have earned. You always have to take 12 at the minimum that are required, but the earned amount, and they only really have that sliding scale of 6 and 3, those lower amounts, basically for freshmen in the first semester and the second semester. After that, it standardizes and goes to about a 2.0 across the board. And then it might say by, fourth term, you need to earn, I'll do junior because it's easier. By your junior year, you had to have 60 credits and you have to have a 2.0. And usually that's the breaking point, that 2.0 and 60 credits, because a lot of students sometimes might not have taken a course, or they might have taken a course that didn't apply to their degree, or they might have failed a course, which made them less than 60 credits by the time they were a junior. And at 60 credits, you also have to have declared a major at the start of your term after you earn 60 credits. So if you earn 60 credits at the end of spring, you've got till spring until the major declaration date for fall to have your major on file. And then the credits that you take in that fall must count towards that degree program. So there's lots of little rules with state aid. The one big tool that I can tell students to utilize to help them track their TAP eligibility is the FACS system. So Cuny has their own homegrown FACS program, which basically maps all of your courses taken from DegreeWorks and your degree transcript against all the state aid rules. So it can measure every course, and it keeps a historical reference of all the courses that you take, and it can show a student directly where they might be failing or where they need to check their course in order to make sure that they keep their TAP for that term. So I advise that the student use their FACS tool, and on our website at cuny.edu/financial aid, we have a whole page on state aid and how to maintain state aid, and we have a FACS guide to walk students through how to understand the FACS system. It could tell the student when they're failing, what the state calls SAP as progress in pursuit, or where their other requirements might be lacking in order to make sure that they can make the change quickly before they're certified for the term. And now in a post-COVID environment for TAP, for a student who would have opted into the credit, no credit grade policy, you took 4 classes, you passed 2, you failed 2, but you said, I'm going to take those 2 Fs and change it to no credit. The state has allowed for those students to be certified as impacted by COVID-19 by contacting their financial aid TAP certifying office. It might not be in the financial aid office, it could be in the bursar's office or the registrar's office, but you contact the TAP certifying office and let them know that you had this option, this is what happened. They will require documentation from you. They will give you a form to submit to say what your circumstance was, and if plausible, they will certify you as impacted by COVID, and they will send that up to the state. And when the state receives that, they will basically take that information of what normally they would have expected you to pass all your classes with a 2.0, right? They would have said, okay, they're impacted by COVID. The school certified them as such. Therefore, we're going to let them get their fall payment, and you get to keep your spring payment as well.
That is all the questions that I have for you today. I want to thank you for your time in joining us today and sharing all this information with our student athletes CUNY-wide. So for all of those folks who joined in today, thank you very much for joining in to talk about it Tuesday with CUNY Athletics, sponsored by the Hospital for Special Surgery. As in all the other weeks, if you've missed this presentation or you would like to check it out and see this all this information again, all of it is available on cunyathletic.com and YouTube. So Zalika, thank you very much for your time.
You're most welcome.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.